Hello and welcome to the Regen podcast. I'm Regen and once again I'm here with my dad, Old School Purist, who is a more casual fan of electric motorsport, and we're going to be reflecting today back on Formula E Season 6, and I think a good place to start would be to briefly talk about the two races that have taken place since the last time we did one of these podcasts, the rounds 10 and 11 of the championship, the last two races on the extended layout in Berlin, the first of which was won by Oliver Rowland for Nissan, and then you had the Mercedes 1-2 in the second race with Stoffel Vandoorne leading Nick de Vries. So do you have any thoughts about those two races? For example, any drives, any teams that stood out to you?
Well, just Mercedes, I suppose. But then they stood out at the beginning of the year somewhat to a degree. They seemed, as a new team to the grid, although I believe you've said they're not exactly new, they had done some preparation. But
well, this is the thing. It would seem like a very... not to take anything away from them, it would seem like a great introduction to the championship for Mercedes. They've come in and been competitive right out the box, been on the podiums, got a 1-2 finish. But while this is their first season officially, they kind of had a pseudo debut in Season 5 running a simply HWA, which meant that they could effectively get a season of development under their belt before coming in officially as a manufacturer of the full branding, the full backing. And again, that's not to take anything away from them. I think it's a very smart business move because it seems to have paid off very well, because they could come straight into this season without any teething problems, and Stoffel Vandoorne was on the podium right out of the blocks.
Well, indeed, it was quite scary, actually. Just the name Mercedes and its obvious connotations with its dominance in Formula One. That coming into Formula E for a team to turn up, get its cars out and be on it straight away like that, and that is scary. Like, Formula E is not meant to be like that. You're not meant to turn up with your Formula E team and
well, true, because remember the trouble Jaguar had. I mean, they came in with much fanfare back in Season 3 and had they're up there and competitive now, but they had a pretty poor and uncompetitive first season, lots of teething problems, of course. But Mercedes, and like you say, there is the association with the name with Mercedes as well. I think that we all know how dominant they are in Formula One.
Only, 3 or 4 rounds in before it all come to a stop, and you had Stoffel Vandoorne leading the championship.
He was leading the championship early on in the season, that's right.
Now, it faded away a little bit, but I would say, as the question you asked, was that those last two races, they came back again. They were back. Yeah. I mean, not that they ever went away that much. DS Techeetah, did their bit, got it all, won it, and appear to have this several multi-race dominance. But Mercedes at the end, and those final two races, well, especially the last one, and
they got 1-2 finish.
The 1-2 finish, that was them coming back again. So as a whole, finishing like that and looking at their season as a whole, did they finish second in the championship?
They were third in the championship. Yeah, behind Nissan. And Nissan finished very strongly as well. We'll probably talk about them in a bit. But yes, Mercedes getting the 1-2 finish at the end. And of course, it's great for Stoffel Vandoorne. It's his first win in the championship, which was it was coming. We knew he was going to get a win at some point, and he's finally got that win. And that's a good story. But I think a little shout out to his teammate Nick de Vries, because that was his podium, that was his first podium, and that's also kind of been a long time coming.
Is that true? So what, was it these races at Berlin?
Yes, Nick de Vries had never scored a podium before until the last race of the season.
And that was the first win for Vandoorne?
That was the first win for Vandoorne and the first podium for de Vries, Vandoorne scored a couple of podiums in the first two races of the season. So
basically, he got his championship lead through...
Yeah. Now, de Vries...
Consistency to begin with, then, rather than winning races. Yeah.
And yes, it was consistently. He came third in the first two races, then I think he was sixth in Santiago, and then he was leading the championship after that, because you remember, it was all up and down. Sam Bird won the first race, and then he crashed out of the second race, and it was all quite topsy-turvy, people winning and then crashing out and all of that, until, as you say, Techeetah got a march on once we got to Berlin, and Da Costa pulled away in the championship. So consistency is a big thing in Formula E.
That's right. Well, yes, actually, yes. I remember, and I said in the last podcast, the thing with the Berlin, it was unusual to see sort of similar results keep happening, because normally from race to race things just change, but
they do, and that was a big point we kind of covered in the last podcast, how impressive it was what Da Costa and Techeetah were doing. But going back to De Vries, great podium for him, first podium, but I think why that, from my point of view, is an especially good podium, a sort of popular podium. I mean, I say popular, yeah, I like it, I really appreciate him getting that podium, and I think the big reason for that was because, as De Vries said himself in the interview afterwards, he'd kind of been knocking on that door of that podium throughout the season. He got I think he did finish third on track. He was going to be on the podium at Santiago, but then he got a penalty which knocked him back, and there were other races where he was in contention, so he was always up there, and he was always running up towards the front in contention to get a podium.
Well, he's a feisty driver, and definitely.
Well, indeed, very feisty.
In Berlin, you could see a lot of that feistiness.
So it felt like a good sort of redemption for him to finally get that podium. And it's great to see De Vries doing that, and it's great to see Nick De Vries in the championship and being competitive, because and this is a good point, I think, talking more generally about the state of Formula E at the moment, Stoffel Vandoorne is an ex-Formula 1 driver. He's sort of on his way down in his career, whereas Nick De Vries came out of Formula 2 into Formula E.
Yes, he did, and indeed. It was his decisive move.
Yeah.
To move to Formula E.
And from his point of view, he's done very well for himself. I'm sure he would have loved to have been in Formula 1, but he gets to drive in Formula E for Mercedes, and it must be really great to say you're a Mercedes driver, especially right now.
And I think he did say as much when he got that Formula E drive, because he was good friends with Latifi.
I remember you telling me this.
On the Formula 2 grid. And it has been, together they were hoping out for each other, and both of them hoping to get something on the F1 grid. And Latifi first got the Williams drive, and De Vries couldn't see an F1 drive coming, but then was given the Formula E drive, and that meant as good to him as an F1 drive. Was a Formula E drive with Mercedes, was as good as having an F1 drive.
Absolutely. I mean, it looks great on your CV, and, to tell your friends, isn't it, that you're a Mercedes driver, whatever series it's in. And seeing someone come out of Formula 2 and into Formula E, like I made a video just like a few weeks back, actually, which was all about this point about how Formula E needs its own stars. It can't go on being the Formula 1 Rejects Championship, which is why it's great that Da Costa, a driver who's never been a Formula 1 driver, has won the championship. But Nick De Vries is another good example of a Formula E star. He's come out of the support series, and now he's making a name for himself in Formula E, and he'll be famous for being a Formula E driver if he continues on this trajectory.
Yes, that will be the future. You will get young drivers working their way up through formulas and then finding themselves going to Formula E without necessarily even trying to go to Formula 1 first.
Yeah. And I think if Mercedes keep on the trajectory they're on at the moment as well, it could be, I can see them being top championship contenders. We'll talk about that more in a second, but De Vries and Vandoorne as teammates, I can see a great rivalry developing between those two as well. I think De Vries is still, it's his first year, he's still adapting to the series, but next season, like De Vries, with all his talents, will be really pushing Vandoorne, and I think Vandoorne isn't going to have it easy in that team. We could see a close rivalry between those teammates, which will be quite exciting.
Yes, it's definitely, the season for Mercedes has been a statement of intent, and I think Nissan Techeetah will be very concerned about the competition next season.
They're really, really making moves in the championship now, Mercedes. Now, I don't think you can't really talk about the last two races in Berlin without talking about the qualifying drama which took place for the round 10, the first race on the extended layout, which saw the 4 champions, Antonio Felix da Costa, Sebastian Buemi, Jean-Eric Vergne, Lucas di Grassi, all failed to set a time. Basically, they went out in qualifying, and because they didn't want to be it's Group 1, they don't want to be on the dirty track, so they leave it as late as they can, and 4 of the cars in that group, the 4 champions, all failed to make it to the line in time. What drama.
That is that old thing of leaving it too late because you think you're going to get it at its best, and it seems to be a creeping habit around various motorsports.
I mean, you can criticise the format in Formula E and the whole thing about it being Group 1, but, this has been happening in other motorsport series as well. I mean, it's the equivalent, really, of what happened infamously in Formula 1 at Italy just last year.
Yes. And I remember a couple of years ago now, well, more than a couple of years ago.
Quite a few years ago, it happened in the World Touring cars as well.
Which was ridiculous, and pretty much the whole grid failed.
Yeah, with that one, it was the entirety of them. They were all going round in a pack, and none of them made it. I think when it happened in Formula 1, 2 of the drivers managed to set a time. But yes, now that's happened in Formula E, and, with the top drivers, and, I know it was controversial. Di Grassi wasn't happy about the way the Techeetahs were behaving, but honestly, the Techeetahs ended up not setting a time as well, so I'm sure they weren't doing anything deliberately. They just didn't get the hurry up in enough time, because ultimately none of them made it across the line. They missed out by some margin setting a lap there.
Yes, it's bizarre how teams with, so many people, so much technology and equipment that measures to the nth degree what they're doing, that they can get things like that wrong. It is bizarre, but it does happen.
Indeed, and it does happen. And you'd think they wouldn't make. They're the basic errors. They're the basic mistakes. You'd think they get things like that right. They invest all this into doing the perfect strategy and so on, but into their complicated energy management systems, things like that, like missing out on your qualifying lap, they're the basic things, aren't they? So
yes,
it does tend to happen, but really it's inexcusable, really.
It is. I guess it's a case of teams wanting to push things to the limit, and you push,
it is what they do,
and it can blow up and backfire on you. You push things to the limit, it's over the limit. So when they're waiting for the perfect time to start driving a fast lap, and you wait too long, well, you've missed it. You're not even going to get a lap now. So it's basically blown up in your face. It's blown up in their faces by pushing it too far.
That is a way to look at it, definitely. And they are all pushing it. And in a sense, it is good that they're pushing it. But yeah, that's a fairly amateur-looking mistake for them to make. But I think this is a good place to segue into talking about, more generally, about the format in Formula E at the moment, the qualifying system. We did sort of touch on it briefly last time, but I think this is an important point of discussion for me to reflect back on because of the manner in which Da Costa won the championship. What do you think of the current qualifying format, where they're divided where they are in the championship into groups, and then those who are highest in the championship go out first on the dirty track, and then the next group and the next group and so on?
Formula E
is controversial.
Qualifying has never seemed straightforward to me, and I'm pretty sure to any person that wants to have a look at Formula E for the first time will struggle to understand what the qualifying is, how that works, or the reasoning behind why it's done the way it's done. Well, I believe that over the years it's gone through minor tweaks and changes.
Well, yes.
It's not ultimately. You'd think there is should be a more straightforward way of a qualifying system.
I mean, it has gone through tweaks and changes because, of course, just back in season 4, just sort of a couple of years ago, it used to be that it was similar to how it was now. They were all split into groups based on championship order, but then the groups went out in a random order, whereas now it's like reverse championship order, which means that the guys at the top of the championship are always coming out first and always on the dirty track, which means more often than not they're quite far down towards the back of the grid, which keeps things mixed up all the time. And this is where your old school purism in your name perhaps comes in, because you could argue that that's a little bit artificial as well as being complicated.
I suppose it's a sort of backdoor way of reversing the grids, or at least, like you said, mixing them up.
Now, I definitely prefer it over a reverse grid, because I think it is something It's using something quite natural. It's using track evolution, which is something that you're going to have anyway, regardless of how you do it. You can only get so many cars out on tracks. So track evolution is always going to be a factor. It's a natural thing. You can't get rid of it. So you might as well use it to mix things up a bit.
Yes, you might, and you might as well. You have to have a system. If you're going to put, obviously, they can't let all the cars out at once to qualify whenever they want. Although it's never been tried. I mean, if you had a long open window to allow cars to go out and qualify laps.
Well, I mean, the problem with these Formula E tracks, they tend to be quite small and tight and narrow, and I think they just want to sort of limit the amount of cars out there. Otherwise, it could just get too congested
at any one
easily.
time. Yeah, I guess that is why they're doing it.
Especially now when we have 24 cars on the grid.
That's
I mean,
true.
These are big grids now. It's not. It's come on. The grid size has come on a lot since sort of like back in season 2 when it was just kind of like 18 cars on the grid.
So I suppose if you are going to do it in group sessions, then, you know, you have to have a system to decide what those groups are. So from that point of view, it's as good as any. And, you know, what else would you do except perhaps totally random?
Yeah, like, I mean, well, they used to have the randomized system where they went out in a random order, but now it's engineered in such a way to sort of punish drivers higher in the championship more. And John-Eric
so that's the artificial bit then, isn't it? They've used it. So they used to have it random, but they thought, actually, we could do it like this.
Yeah. And John-Eric Verne, like, understandably, it would be him complaining about it because he's the one who's won 2 championships, came 3rd in the championship this season, so he's generally up towards the top of the championship order, so he gets punished by this system probably more than most, and he's moaned about it quite a lot, and then, you know, he goes out and says, "Oh, I can't qualify." Oh,
and he does complain a lot about anything.
I think he's
anyway.
very defeatist about it, like, "Yo, it's a waste of time. I can't qualify. I'm going to be at the back of the grid because I have to clean the track." But to be fair, time and time again, I distinctly remember Sam Bird doing it at Mexico, and then, of course, Da Costa twice at Berlin. We've seen that the drivers in Group 1, which is supposedly the group when you can't do anything, you might as well not bother, they're getting out of there and they're able to get into Superpole. Now, it is more difficult. It is very hard to get out of Group 1 and into Superpole and have a chance of getting on pole position, but it can be done, and we have seen drivers do it.
Seen drivers do it, yes.
And I think that's an important thing, because it would seem too artificial to me if, you know, if you're leading the championship, you're guaranteed to be at the back of the grid. But no, if you're quick enough, you do still have a chance to get up on the top of the grid, even on pole position.
Almost forced to try harder.
Yeah, it's just harder. I'm sure they're all trying hard anyway, but it is still possible to do that. Now, there is an element about this system that I'm a little unsure about, actually, and the best way to explain it is by looking at how Antonio Felix da Costa won the championship, because we came to Berlin, and Da Costa, and it was Mitch Evans at that time, Max Gunther and Alexander Sims in the BMWs, De Grassi, those guys were all at the top of the championship after the long break when we came to Berlin. They were in Group 1 in qualifying, which means they were on the dirty track, and of course the others all suffered and they were all down at the back of the grid, but Da Costa and Techeetah, of course, because they were riding the wave of success, they managed to get out of Superpole and they got put it on pole position. And then the next day, in the next race, they were in that group again and they managed to do the same thing. Meanwhile, all the others were suffering, and because they were in the Group 1, which means they were further back on the grid, which means they had to fight forward in the race. Meanwhile, Da Costa was able to dominate both races from pole position, and then he had a massive lead in the championship. It occurs to me, sort of analysing that we have a situation now where, under certain circumstances, this system, which is designed to mix things up and keep things unpredictable, can actually help a driver to extend their lead in the championship. Because if you have a pack of cars that is very, very close together. We've got 24 cars, but in its extremely tight competitive field, you know, where we've seen like tenths of a second make the difference of like 10 places on the grid. And in that system, when you have one team or one driver who develop quite a big advantage, what the system is effectively doing is they're still able to get out of, because they're that good and they've got that much of advantage, they're still able to get out of Group 1 and get into Superpole, whereas the others all can't because it's so mixed up. So it means if you've got one team or one driver which have an advantage over the rest of the pack, they can actually extend their lead in the championship quicker because no one else can be sort of consistently finishing in second place behind them, because what it's effectively doing is mixing everyone else up. Meanwhile, Da Costa's banging it on pole and winning, on pole and winning. And I think there's a little question mark over the qualifying system there. That was just something that occurred to me over the Berlin races.
Yeah.
Particularly those first two where Da Costa just dominated, and all the others like Evans and the BMWs that were up in the championship were just way down, and it was all mixed up behind him.
Yes. Didn't work for all the qualifyings, all 6 qualifyings though, did it, for him?
Well, no, it didn't, and it certainly didn't work out in that qualifying where he didn't set a time, no. But that was something that occurred to me.
Yes, and quite possibly, I was going to say, quite possibly, a contributing factor in that sort of thinking as well would be if you're doing it at the same place all the time as well.
Well, yes, indeed. And it's probably amplified when you've got the 6 races at Berlin with just like 1 or 2 days between them and like very little time for the teams to go away and reflect and develop the cars or anything like that.
Yes,
with virtually no time for
there's
that.
less of that if with each qualifying you're presented with a new track and new.
I just think it's interesting how, and there is no perfect system, and certainly so far I think, and particularly in season 5, this system has worked well in terms of keeping everything mixed up all the time. But it is interesting that system, perhaps under certain circumstances, could actually amplify the domination of one team or driver and make them extend their championship lead more quickly.
Yeah.
It's just something in terms of the format I was thinking about.
But it's hard to know what to do otherwise.
Yeah.
So like I said, even though it is a bit strange, but if you're going to put them out in groups, you might as well have some kind of system.
Yeah.
Maybe could go back to the random groups.
Well, indeed, possibly. I mean, I'm saying this here. I'm not saying this as in they need to change the system now. I don't have any strong stance on this. It's just something that occurred to me, and it's something to watch out for in future seasons. I'll be interested to see how this qualifying system affects things once you have 1 or 2 teams that have a big advantage maybe, or once things aren't so closely bunched together, or just in different seasons, in different scenarios. It's something to keep an eye on.
Yes, you're right. It does sound cynical making the groups in the order that they are rather than randomizing it. The random idea was more pure, if you like.
Yeah.
It was the more level field for everyone.
It could be, depending on how...
And more of a lottery for everyone, as well as to what state of track they'd be in.
And, that system certainly gave us some exciting championships. Like back in Season 4, we had some great races. So I don't think you necessarily need things to be as sort of topsy-turvy as they are now to have great racing.
No, absolutely not. I don't know how much of a factor the last couple of years have been quite manic, but then most Formula E years can have
Well, indeed,
manic.
they have been, but they've been manic in their own
I don't know
way.
that has been a reflection on the qualifying systems or not.
I mean, I consider Season 2 to be quite manic in certain ways, but Lucas Di Grassi had a string of podium finishes, at least on track, that lasted, 8 consecutive races. I think he was on the podium, and nearly every race that season, pretty much. And that was a really exciting season that was manic in a lot of ways. So, who knows? But yes, I'm not complaining. I think the system that we have at the moment is working quite well. It's just something to watch out for in the coming seasons. And talking of the coming seasons, I think the other thing to watch out for once we get into Season 7 on the big question is, will anyone be able to topple Techeetah? Because they've proven they have the advantage. They really had the march on in the second half of this season, and presumably they'll keep that up into next season. Who, if anyone, can topple them and can get near them? Who do we think are the championship contenders going to be?
I would say the three teams we're looking at that finished, the other two teams.
So Nissan,
Mercedes. And Mercedes, because neither of them are actually that far off from Techeetah.
No.
It's just worked out for Techeetah, and they've sort of on track, they've dominated. But in pure, on the table, championship table, it's not that far ahead.
Well, no. I mean, in Formula E terms, Techeetah seems to have quite a big advantage, but really it's not an advantage that can't be bridged. And with the momentum that Mercedes finished on at the end of this season, and the fact they are Mercedes, I can see them getting
the way they've done their whole season. I can definitely see them. I think Nissan should be very worried about Mercedes, and I think Techeetah should be definitely.
And I think Techeetah should be worried about Nissan as well, because Nissan were coming on quite strong.
Yeah.
And of course the difference is, back in season 5, at the end of the season before the season just gone, Nissan were making big ground at the end of the season, and Sebastian Buemi won a race and they got a string of podiums, and it was all coming really good. And then they kind of went backwards at the start of season 6, but you can attribute that to the fact that they had their controversial twin motor system in season 5 that got banned effectively before the start of season 6. They were told they couldn't use the technology, which sort of sent them back to square one in terms of development, and they got knocked back with their development, and then they had to spend season 6 kind of on the back foot making up ground. And you saw a pattern of progress with Nissan again through the season, to the point where Oliver Rowland got the win at Berlin, and they managed to take the runner-up spot in the championship, in the team's championship, and they should be able to keep the momentum going into season 7. I don't see why they shouldn't, really, because they're not running any controversial powertrains this time. They're not going to get their powertrain banned for next season, so they should be able to carry that momentum over this time.
Yes, I would say so. I think both Nissan and Mercedes could be pretty level-pegged, fighting each other. And both of them quite close to Techeetah.
Techeetah, yes.
Although I would say that Mercedes has possibly got a better driver lineup. Hard to say at the moment.
Well, yes, we mentioned that earlier, Stoffel Van Dorn and Nick de Vries, and it's certainly going to be great seeing how they duel with each other between them. But while we're on the subject of drivers, I'm just going to throw out my sort of dark horse prediction who could cause a stir for next season. I'm going to say Oliver Rowland.
Yes, I do like Oliver Rowland, and I have liked his performances, but they've never set anything on fire in the past. No. But I have liked his performances. And his name does come up now and then in races. And so that first win was something good. I do remember thinking, how good for him. Yeah. He's done that.
He was another of those drivers where that wasn't really a surprise to me. He had that coming. He got a couple of podiums in his first season and in season 5. And let's not forget, he was thrown into that car at the last minute, without a lot of preparation, because originally it was going to be Alexander Albon driving that Nissan in season 5, and what happened to him? Where's he got to these days? But anyway,
struggling in another series somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. I heard he was doing something, I can't remember, but so Oliver Rowland was thrown in there at the last minute, and I remember even after his very first race, he scored points in his first race and was only just behind Buemi at the end. And, the commentators and everyone was saying that was very impressive for him. And he went on and scored a couple of podiums. He was close to getting a podium at Mexico that season, but of course they ran out of energy with a lap left to go. But I think Oliver Rowland's done some impressive performances. I remember Rowland, I don't know if you remember this, but way back when, we watched the British Touring Car Championship, and way back in the day there used to be a support series on there, the Formula Renault UK, and I remember in 2011, I think it was, and Alexander Lynn, there's another name you'll know, he won the championship, and Oliver Rowland was his rival in the championship, and both of those were great talents. I remember watching them and then seeing them later on in Formula 2. So, it's good to see those familiar names, those talented British drivers making their way into Formula E and showing off their talents.
Yes, it's always good to see people that you've first spot in the lower categories and see them succeed moving up.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw Oliver Rowland out there just because I think Nissan aren't going to get their powertrain bans this time. They're riding a curve of momentum. They doing very well at the end of this season, taking the runner-up spot in the team's championship, and they can carry that into next season. And I think Oliver Rowland, like Sebastian Buemi's the old guy now. He's the old guy being shown up by the youngsters in the championship now. And I think Oliver Rowland's gonna start really pushing him more and more, and we've already seen it. And Rowland getting a win this season. Buemi beat Rowland in the championship this season, but he didn't get a win.
Has he been consistent, Rowland?
Well, it's a good question. He's had a good few points finishers in the championship this season. You could argue he's not been as consistent as Buemi, because Buemi's been getting the podiums, but...
The question is whether he can consistently, if the car's good enough, whether he can consistently keep getting himself up there.
With more experience, I can see him, and the Nissan being a good car, I can see him getting up there and pushing. And another driver who's like that is Maximilian Günther, because of course he's the youngest ever winner in the championship. This season was really, I think, a sign of things to come more than anything, because the BMW team had a very exciting driver lineup, but I didn't think they had a driver in their team who was really at the level to fight for the championship yet, because Maximilian Günther, he was really good, won 2 races, but he was only 19 years old, and he's clearly still got a way to go. He's still maturing as a driver, and he wasn't very consistent. He got 2 wins and a second place, and those were his only points finishes. But it's definitely a sign of things to come. I think as he gains more experience and matures as a driver, he could do great things, and I can see him also being a contender. So there's another exciting prospect to look out for next season and in seasons beyond is Max Günther.
Yes, I would say, and like Ollie Rowland, I would perhaps more so think not necessarily next season, but seasons beyond.
Well, he is very young as Günther, but I can see him potentially being a great name in the championship in the future, and he's one of those I cited in the video again who is a star of Formula E. He's not a star of any other championship. He came into Formula E and he'll make his name and become famous as a Formula E driver, which is really good to see. Günther doing that, Oliver Rowland, Mercedes, Nick De Vries. So guys like De Vries and Günther and Rowland, they're the next generation of Formula E drivers.
But the old generation have not finished yet.
They're not finished yet.
And you obviously into Cheetah, we've still got Verne, and that's still going to be something. And
guys like Buemi and De Grassi are still competitive, but they're finding it a lot harder and harder, I think, to stay competitive. Like these names,
yes, the talent's
showing
coming
them up more
through
and more,
now,
which is good to see.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that's going to be a lot of exciting things to look forward to next season. Like, do you have any other sort of final thoughts heading into season 7?
Well, personally, I was quite attracted to the idea of Mitch Evans and Sam Bird coming together for Jaguar.
True, yes, that's something I was meaning to bring up, actually.
I was hoping that Jaguar were going to end this season we've just had on a higher note than what they did end it on.
Unfortunately.
Because there were signs just before Berlin that, Mitch Evans won a race, didn't he? And I thought Jaguar might finally be pushing and getting it up there, and Mitch has been giving some good equipment, and the thought of him and Bird in some good equipment as a lineup, I thought that's going to be strong. After Berlin now, I'm not so sure, But I hope that they will get themselves in the mix up there.
I hope so too, because I'm a fan of Sam Bird's and Mitch Evans, and I'm very excited to see them together in the same team. And, you know, Sam Bird is one of those drivers. He's one of the greatest drivers in the championship, arguably the best driver, sort of up there with Felix Rosenqvist, who's never won a championship in the series. Really, really good. And Mitch Evans as well. And them two in the team together and Jaguar is like a dream team, but it is a shame that Jaguar ended with Berlin on a little bit of a low point, but hopefully they can bounce back because they've shown they can do it. They got that absolutely dominant win in Mexico.
Yes, that was it. The machinery started looking very good.
So yes,
and it fell away, and then we went over that in the last discussion, didn't we? How the Jaguar seemed to just fall away at Berlin, but
it did.
Could have just been that one set of races in that one location.
Well, indeed, and I think
good for them, and I'm sure they will get it together.
Well, I think they definitely suffered from the fact that it was the situation and the 6 races in 9 days thing in Berlin, because they didn't have time to go away and reflect and do development work and things like that. So, you know, they sort of arrived at Berlin, weren't that competitive, and that was it, unfortunately. And Evans came in as runner-up in the championship and left there 7th in the championship, and it ended up ultimately being a kind of damage limitation. It was a shame, but hopefully we see more of, from a personal point of view, as you say, like to me as well, because I'm a fan of Evans and Bird and Jaguar and that dream team. I hope that next season we see more of the Mexico Evans and Jaguar.
That's right,
The dominant, or at least the competitive in championship contention team.
If they get that back together again like that, yes. So, I mean, so they could be up there troubling Nissan, Mercedes, and, you know, worrying even Techeetah. Either way, we're talking at the moment, and we've covered, you briefly covered BMW as well.
Yes. Well,
we're looking at all the teams, actually.
Well, indeed. I mean, we're
saying who's likely.
We started this out by saying Mercedes are going to do really well, and then saying Techeetah are going to do really well. And then we've got Techeetah, Nissan, Mercedes. It's going to be close between them. But then you've got BMW, and then you've got Jaguar, then you've got Porsche. We haven't even mentioned them.
No, we haven't.
They're a big manufacturer team. They've had their year of development now. They'll surely be very competitive going into next season, and they've just signed Pascal Wehrlein.
So ultimately it should be a very close season.
Yes, which you never get that in Formula E, do you?
All between all the teams.
It'll be another one of those, I think, honestly, where, there's the favourites and things, but you just never know, because any one of these could sort of spring a surprise and be there. It's so unpredictable, and I think that's probably the biggest thing to take away from this, is that, if you want a prediction for what's going to happen in Formula E Season 7, don't ask me, because I'm not going to be placing any bets on it.
No, you can't.
Anyway.
You can't.
You just can't.
You just know that Techeetah are going to do well, and then we've covered reasons why a lot of other teams are going to do very well,
or at least have the potential to do well.
And so it could be another big mix-up of those teams. We'll call Techeetah, as they are now, the 2 times champion team that are holding on to
3 times champion now,
holding on to that crown. And so you're going to say, right, they're the ones slightly in front, and everyone's got to chase them and get them.
Yeah.
And we're basically, all those teams we said, probably as good chances each
They've
other
all got
of
a
all
chance.
doing it.
We don't know what's going to happen, but they've probably all got him at a chance. And Mercedes are probably the favourites because they've ended it on a real high, but you just never know.
No.
So I think, the only thing we can really conclude is it's going to be very exciting, and let's get it underway. I can't wait for Season 7 now. So I think we've kind of covered all the main points there. Looking forward to next season. So thank you for listening once again to the Regen podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more anecdote and analysis from Formula E and motorsport.